Good day to all. Welcome to Extreme Recap. Jim Powell, a moderately aged man, portrays the main episode of the series. He functions as a police craftsman and is fairly disappointed with his family and calling. His researcher spouse, Stephanie, buckles down for an enormous logical organization called Worldwide Tech as she is at present doing explore on a baffling plant. Daphne and JJ, his two high school kids, are continually on their telephones and lack the capacity to deal with exercises like playing get with their dad. They're losing the ties that a regular family ought to have among themselves. Fed up, Jim pursues the choice that they will all go with mother on her examination excursion to Brazil so they can all hang out. Jim recommends that they take a trip over the Amazon rainforest while they're voyaging. However, things don't work out as expected because of a coming tempest. The plane is compelled to land in the sea, which is to some degree sparkling with little neon particles. Jim's family is unharmed, which is a blessing. Yet, their pilot isn't all that fortunate. Jim and his family are all back home in the following scene, living their separate lives once more. Subsequent to getting back from the outing, Jim is once again working at the region where he chats with a female analyst show, about a case as they're talking. A person in the station out of nowhere snatches an official's weapon and focuses it at the investigator. Jim sees this and jumps to push her far removed, saving her. Be that as it may, the weapon actually goes off inevitably. Investigator Cho gets up and ponders where the shot is. Jim then pardons himself and searches in his grasp. There's the shot. It appears that he avoided injury by catching the bullet with his own hand. Jim is stunned to grasp what simply occurred. He then investigates what might have occurred to him by going to a batting cage. He warns the security fellow and figures out how to have the entire spot for him for 60 minutes, setting the pitching machine to 90 miles per hour. He shockingly gets pitches easily. Then, at that point, he speeds up to 140 miles per hour. Still no issue. All at once his dearest companion and partner, George, who is a lead prosecutor, appears. Jim also gives him a gun. George isn't enthused about shooting Jim, yet he incidentally discharged the weapon and Jim gets the shot once more. The two of them are left in total skepticism by what simply occurred. Meanwhile, Stephanie is in a difficulty. She needs to have a pleasant supper with Jim, however work is requesting her consideration. She needs to get across town for a work meeting. However, traffic is extremely bad. Having no other choice, she begins to run. What's more, this is the point at which she accelerates. She makes it to the office on time despite whizzing by cars on the freeway. It seems like Stephanie has additionally gotten a few new capacities back at the lab. She tells her lab tech Katie about it. Furthermore, they go to a race horsing track to test her capacities while Stephanie begins to run on the track. Katie, with a radar firearm, peruses that Stephanie's speed is in the incredible 700 miles per hour range with her freshly discovered capacity. Stephanie hurries back home to assist her child JJ with schoolwork as he has a learning handicap. Meanwhile, Jim and George show up at a roof. George is persuaded that Jim has one more superpower also, that he can fly. Jim is suspicious, however surrenders and leaps off the housetop. Sadly, his hunch ends up being valid and he drops to the ground, making a gigantic cavity in it. At the point when he gets up, he takes a gander at the highest point of the structure and jumps back to the rooftop. This causes Jim to understand that despite the fact that he can't fly, he can jump like an insane superhuman. As the two men return to their vehicle, their police scanner snaps. It just so happens, a person who's been burglarizing Jim's stores is being sought after midtown. Jim begins to jump that way. He winds up getting the person in a rear entryway. However, before he can quell him, the troublemaker's accomplice out of nowhere shoots him toward the rear of the head. Jim hauls the shot somewhere far away from me, yet he is draining prior to falling oblivious. He asks George for assistance. The next morning, Jim awakens in bed to track down George and Stephanie before him. Stephanie asks him everything the matter is and Jim at last says to her what's happening shot. She likewise lets her significant other know that she's gained godlike powers. In the meantime, their girl, Daphne, is having sweetheart difficulty at school. The quest partners. Sarah is hitting on him. Stressed, she converses with her companion Lindsay about it later as Daphne plays in her ball game. She begins to hear everybody's considerations. It cracks her out. In order to pick her up from school, she calls her parents. Daphne then, at that point, enlightens her mother concerning her having the option to guess individuals' thoughts. This causes Stephanie to understand that even her little girl has acquired some sort of capacity. Slice to the following scene, the power require a family meeting. They discover that everybody has some sort of force aside from poor JJ the following day. Be that as it may, while JJ is taking a numerical test, things begin to gleam on the board. He also sees the test responses right in front of him. He grins and rapidly gets everything on paper. Daphne meets her boyfriend somewhere else, and she can read his thoughts as they kiss. She tragically discovers that he's laying down with her dearest companion, Lindsay. He is left wondering how she knew that he was cheating on her at work because she leaves so quickly. Jim draws an image of the gem hoodlum in light of the battle with him in the rear entryway. The picture is then run through facial recognition, and based on his information, he is able to obtain an ID. Criminal investigator Cho and her partner get ready to find the hoodlum before they leave the area. They advise Jim to remain behind since he's simply a craftsman and not a wrongdoing warrior. A shootout breaks out when the detectives arrive at the thief's apartment, and Detective Cho ends up in the trunk of his car. At the point when the cheat is going to drive off, Jim shows up there. They begin to battle. However, the jewel thief is prepared for him this time. The thief appears in the back again after Jim hits him unexpectedly. The hoodlum then lets Jim know that he's by all accounts not the only one who has. They keep battling with Jim, always being unable to loan a spotless punch on the miscreant. This is until the hoodlum winds up behind Jim with a firearm pointed at his neck. Out of nowhere a shot rings out. Fortunately, it's from criminal investigator Cho. It turns out that she was able to shoot the bad guy after escaping from the trunk. It's uncovered that she didn't see Jim's superpower. So she advises him to leave before inner issues begins getting clarification on some things. The scene then shifts to a morgue, where an enigmatic man reveals himself to be Stephanie's global tech boss to his associate, Morgan, that they ought to kill the individual behind the thief's passing. The next day, Jim keeps on attempting to battle wrongdoing by jumping to a bank burglary. He winds up in a back street with the looters driving a van straight for him. After that, he decides to stop the van, but instead he gets run over. Meanwhile, Stephanie and her lab right-hand Katie work on getting a water test from the Amazon stream. Stephanie believes that the water in the area where the plane crashed has something to do with her and her family's superpower. When back at home, Stephanie begins doing house tasks on super speed. She then, at that point, accepts she possesses energy for everything. In the interim, her child JJ begins improving on his tests in light of the fact that very much like his family, he presently has a super mental ability. One day in the library, Daphne hears her sibling learning complex geometry speculations. He was never a student, so it surprises her to see him there. JJ at long last opens up to educate her concerning his power, yet he admits that he hasn't told their folks since they were so pleased with him after he excelled on the tests. Feeling terrible, Daphne says she'll maintain his mystery later after the chime rings. Because the child consistently failed his math tests, JJ's teacher says he cheated on the last few tests. However, he is now acting straight. As accordingly, JJ blows him away with some perplexing math talk. In any case, his educator actually needs to converse with his folks about his cheating. Subsequently, Jim converses with JJ about the tests. Tragically, JJ gets the feeling that his father believes he's cheating as well and tempests off. The next day, Morgan, the man from the mortuary who has companions with a now dead hoodlum, comes into the police headquarters and converses with investigator Cho. He inquires as to whether she saw anything odd or strange about the bank looter she shot a week ago. The investigator sees something is off with the person. So she says she saw nothing strange. George is working on some police work while George uses Jim's sketch of the bank robbers. He then, at that point, goes to a bank. He accepts the criminal will focus straight away, while George is showing the sketch to certain gatekeepers. The burglars appear with their weapons. George goes into hiding and calls Jim, but even though he manages to inform his friend about the robbery, the robbers catch him and force him into their van. Fortunately, Jim shows up at the scene at the last possible second. At first he gets run over, however at that point recovers, snatches the van and tosses it over. Jim then helps George out of the van. Similarly, as analyst Cho makes an appearance to seek after the burglars, she is as yet ignorant regarding his power. Slice to the following scene. Stephanie and Katie concentrate on the water they figure out how to recover from the Amazon. They are taken aback when they realize it has nothing special about it, prompting them to speculate about the source of their powers. In the meantime, analyst Cho gets back home to her condo and Morgan is there sitting tight for her. It turns out he has supernatural power and uses it to gag her. He asks her, who else realizes that the bank looter she shot last week had abilities. Joe says she is clueless about it. Morgan lets her tumble to the floor, however compels her to point her own weapon towards her. Joe begins to panic. Furthermore, as Morgan escapes the loft, a shot is heard, evidently killing the investigator. He then, at that point, calls Stephanie's supervisor at Worldwide Tech, letting him know that everything is dealt with. Slice to the following scene. A friend's wedding is attended by the Powells. Notwithstanding, a lot of burglars crash the wedding, requesting that everybody put their gems in a crate. The Powells decide not to use their superpower to retaliate against the robbers because they were aware that doing so would put them in danger the following day. However, Stephanie does manage to secure funding for her research at Global Tech. In any case, her supervisor tells her that as a feature of the financing, they need to test her blood test for protection purposes. The organization as of now has her example as it was required some investment back for a comparable venture. Understanding that her chief and the others would learn about her superpower once the blood is tried, Stephanie concocts an arrangement to switch her blood test with Katie. In the following scene, Daphne and her father, Jim, discuss how things are going. All of a sudden he gets a call from George about another wedding that is probably going to be looted. Thusly, Jim deceives her that he has some crisis work at the region. Nonetheless, since Daphne can understand minds, she finds out about his falsehoods. Katie and Stephanie are at Global Tech that night to swap some of Stephanie's blood samples. Katie has the course planned. In order for Stephanie to be seen by the cameras, all she needs to do is break in without pausing. She also needs to swipe a key card. At a certain point, she figures out how to do that and move beyond the watchman secretly. She then effectively swipes the blood tests. Meanwhile, George and Jim are at the wedding. All of a sudden the looters appear and Jim attempts to quell them. During this time, he has chance, yet the projectiles don't deal with him. The burglars accept Jim to be a cop wearing a tactical armor carrier, so they attempt to get away, however not before he punches one of them oblivious. Jim and the robbers flee past Daphne, who is at the venue to investigate her father's activities. Obviously, her father is attempting to battle hoodlums without anyone else. At the point when Jim sees that the burglars are moving away through a rope, he jumps up on a structure and figures out how to snatch one of them by the leg. The looter tumbles down onto a showing up cop vehicle, however shockingly gets by. At the point when Jim gets back, Stephanie and Daphne are sitting tight for him, irate about his lying. It appears that they had made a promise to each other not to use their power until they truly understood what was happening to them. Jim lets them know that his powers are at long last allowing him to be the individual he needs to be. The next day at work, George lets Jim know that they needed to relinquish the burglar. Jim caught this morning. Since they have no proof, in any case, George doesn't have Stephanie's ring, which was recuperated at the scene. Meanwhile, Worldwide Tech's supervisor brings in a worker inquiring as to whether he was in the structure recently as his card was utilized to get to the lab. We understand that the card was taken by Stephanie to break in, however the representative is ignorant regarding this. Afterward, the supervisor notices the CCTV film yet doesn't see anybody. In any case, he sees Stephanie's blood vial quickly vanishing and showing up in the lab's cooler and the boss now has doubts about Stephanie. That evening, Jim takes Stephanie to supper on the top of a cafe. Yet again they dance together and he proposes to her with her recuperated commitment. Turn on notifications, please subscribe for more videos like this, and like the channel to support it. Thank you very much for watching.